My name is Kathleen Barry Ingram. I call myself a former practicing psychotherapist. And I like the word former because doing this work with the horses now, I have been able to not be practicing as a psychotherapist anymore. But a lot of the education stuff that I do comes from my experience. In 1990, I worked at a place called Sierra Tucson. I was director of marketing there. And a woman by the name of Barbara Rector brought the horses in to work with the adolescents. We had an adolescent treatment center. And I started to see how the horses were helping not only the adolescents, but their families. So in other words, they were able to work in the dynamic of the family system. Then in about 1995, when I was working in private practice, Barbara asked me if I'd come and talk about how the application can be for the horses with somebody in advanced, human development or had mental health issues. And I did that and worked with her for a number of years. And in 1998, met a woman named Linda Kohanov at one of the workshops that I was working with Barbara. And Linda said she was writing a book, and I said I'd like to see it. At the time, she didn't have a publisher, and it was probably about 10 pages. And I looked at it and thought, this woman can explain what this means. So when I started to work with the horses, it was an interesting process for me because doing that switch from a lot of the training that I had as a psychotherapist, my graduate training, master's degree, and then I did advanced work in what they call short-term dynamic psychotherapy. And the dynamic part of it, the dynamic part of the psychotherapy is what I really started to work with when Linda and I then were starting to teach people and develop the curriculum to teach equine facilitated learning. What we were able to really determine as we were working with the horses was because, like any experiential learning, when people were embodied in the experience, they had a different outcome than whether they were sitting in my office looking at me and maybe their head was going but their body wasn't engaged. I was just thinking as I was waiting for you that one of the differences between experiential learning as we might see it in a lot of corporations bring people out for ropes courses and those types of things, and I think they're relevant and they work, but the have a pulse and the horse does. And so I think what happens with the horses is that it really helps people to learn how to be in a relationship, whether it's with their spouse or their child or somebody in their office. Because it's that working together with the horses that helps people to really understand how they come across. And one of the big words is incongruence. Because the horse, being a prey animal, is ready to flee at any moment if there's something in their environment that doesn't feel safe. And how many times, if we've seen someone that wants to look really okay, go into an experience and they say, I'm all right, I'm doing fine. And on the outside, they say that inside they're going, this isn't going to work, I'm scared and all that. And the horses, of course, don't respond. What we know now is that actually people have three brains. They have the brain in the gut. Like when someone says, I have a gut knowing, it's a gut feeling, there's actually a brain there. I'm not going to try to describe all the different reasons. That's not my background. They have a brain in the heart, and then they have the brain in the head. And where information comes in is here first, here, and then here. So there's a man by the name of Christian de Quincey that wrote a book that I know you and I have talked about, Radical Knowing. It's dense. But the reason that he wrote the book, Radical Knowing, is current research that they have now that they are learning that people start from here, then go to here, not from here all the way down. So with horses what happens is because they themselves have really large guts and they have a really large heart, is that's how they process information. Their neocortex isn't as developed as ours. And we can learn from that. So when you're working with a horse in experiential learning, what happens is that there is a resonance between you and the horse as you're having the experience. And also going back to the relationship, the importance of relationship, is that you as a facilitator can see what's going on and how that person relates to the horse. It gives you information on how they might relate to people. Obviously, as a counselor, I worked in mental health. I worked with people individually. I worked with families. I'm a systems therapist, so I have a lot of that background. And also, because I was director of marketing, I have corporate background too. The experience isn't just the aha or the breakthrough that happens sometimes in another type of a training or a workshop. What happens is that the transformation continues. And the reason it continues is that it is a whole body experience. Again, I already said that, but that they get the experience in their bodies, and also the fellow people are watching them with that experience. And so they have that other memory of the people that are watching it. So what might look like something in the past that somebody said, oh, that didn't really happen. We hear that all the time in our work, don't we? Somebody goes in with a horse and they have this experience like, oh, that didn't really happen. Well, you know, yes, it did. And that's why, you know, when we have someone work with a horse, we ask them to journal and talk about that. I was just reading when I was waiting for you, somebody's talking about the Navajos have a saying of no more floating clouds. What they mean by that is the floating clouds are sort of like, you know, the aha comes in, but it's not grounded. You know, so what happens with the horses, and if you're doing team building with a corporation, or you're working with a couple, or you're working with someone individually, is that they get this in their body, and that's that implicit knowing. That's that implicit in the body. And also, sometimes the reason that we go back to thinking it didn't happen is it's hard to put words to it. When I started to do the work with Barbara, and then started to do it more intensely when I worked with Linda Kohanev, who wrote the Tao of Equus, as you know, I was frustrated working in my office with clients. And a lot of the people that are in Linda's book are people that were my clients. Obviously, names change in circumstances. Because I would see that they were getting it to a certain point, but they would be stuck. So the work with the horses was taking them to the next level. And I also worked with, and I would bring my women's groups there. A lot of times what you might see, they call it the blind spot, right? That you might see with a behavior that I'm doing over and over and over again, you know, and still getting, right, expecting a different result and getting the same result. That will happen when somebody, I say the horses shine a light on that blind spot. But they do it without judgment. So if I might say something to somebody, their defenses might come up and they might think, oh, Kathleen's saying I'm such and such. But with the horses do it, people don't feel that. One of the things that I think that makes this work, and the work that we do, so valuable is the respect that we have for the horse as a co-facilitator. One of the reasons that you said the first question was, why horses? Well, why would someone like me, who has lots of years of training as a psychotherapist, go, forget it? Because I have a co-facilitator now that really helps me. I could also stand back a little bit from the interaction someone's having with a horse, and I can also see things that are going on there that I might not have been able to see before because I was so totally engaged. Does that make sense? So the horse as a co-facilitator is a really important point in the way that we do our work. Learning doesn't have to be really difficult. Learning can be fun, and learning can be joyful. Horses, we talk a lot about emotion as information. So sometimes there's some sadness that comes up. Sometimes people have some anger come up. But what we teach them is emotional agility. And this also helps when they're going back to work. If somebody can be emotionally agile with a horse, they can be emotionally agile with their co-workers or their husbands or their children. And emotional agility is one of the things the horses teach us, because since they use emotion as information, they're responding in the moment to what's going on. So they can teach us emotional agility, which is that there's no emotion that's negative, there's no emotion that's bad. So if I have sadness come up, then I might, Linda Kohanev developed a chart that we use called the emotional message chart, which really helps people to ask questions about what the emotion is. But like I said, it's so important to remember that what I see over and over and over again is I see somebody walk in with maybe the furrow lines and worry and have these big problems, and I see them walk out like this, more themselves. more themselves. And it isn't because I said anything, or, you know, so it's not like the teacher knows best type thing. It's because they got it in their body with that experience with that beautiful being called the horse. So the way of the horse?